Alright, so this is the video on how to graph a quadratic equation. And we're not going to go very deep into how to graph a quadratic equation because that's an Algebra 2 topic. But what we are going to do is learn how to get the answer of graphing a quadratic equation if the question is a multiple choice question, because that's all we need to be able to do, right? And so before we get into how do we find the answer, or how we go about getting the answer, we first need to realize what makes this a quadratic equation. And what you want to look for is the x value that is being raised to the highest power. We call it the highest degree. And in this case, it's x squared. And so whenever the highest degree is x squared, and that's what this is, y equals x squared plus 4, then it's a quadratic equation. Okay, it's got to have an x squared. The other way I could tell that this is going to be a quadratic equation is by looking at the graphs. Okay, and if you look at these answers, they all kind of have a U shape. Some are, U's opening up, and some are downward. We call those parabolas. And if it's ever a parabola, that means it's a quadratic equation. So you need to look for the highest degree and see if it's an x squared term, or look at the graphs and see if they're parabolas or not. Okay, and so the first thing I do when I answer a quadratic equation question like this is I first look at the x squared term, okay, and I try to eliminate answers. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the x squared term. So if you look here, it says y equals x squared plus 4. The x squared term here is positive, and that's what I'm really looking for. I don't care if there's a number out in front. I'm just looking to see if it's positive or if it's negative. If it's positive, that tells me that the parabolas are going to open upward. So in this case, either A or C would be the right answer because those are both opening upward. They open upward there. If it was negative, then the parabola would open downward, like B or D. And so what that tells me is I can eliminate two of my answers right off the bat because it's a positive x squared. I know it can't be B because that opens downward, and it can't be D because that also opens downward. So the only two left is either A or C. And to figure this out, what you're going to do is you're going to pick an x value. And the x value that I like to always pick, just because it works out, is when x equals 0. What we're going to do is we're going to take x equals 0, which if I get on the graph here is right there, and if the y value is right there, we're going to take x when x is 0 and plug it into this equation, y equals x squared plus 4, and see what the y value is and see if it matches the graph. And that's how we're going to get our answer. So over here on the right side, what I'm going to do, if I can get my pen over here, is I'm going to take, instead of x, I'm going to substitute in 0. And so you've done this in the past when you were substituting, so this shouldn't be new to you. So I'm going to have y equals x squared, but instead of x, I'm going to put 0. So I'm going to have 0 squared plus 4. Okay? And the reason I picked 0, and you probably know this, is because 0 times 0 is always 0, right? So 0 squared is 0 times 0, which is 0. So what that leaves me with is just y equals 4. Okay? And I'm not the fastest writer, but where we go. So what that tells me is when x is 0, that when x is 0, that y is 4. So if you look at the graph, we're going to start with A here. You look at right here, that's x equals 0, and you go up, what is y equal? Y equals 4. So that's my answer. But if I look over here, this is not the answer. C is not the answer because when x is 0, we don't run into 4. The answer to this is going to be way up here somewhere. It's not even on the graph. So what that tells me is that A is the right answer. Okay, so let's look at another problem. And we'll go a little quicker this time. So again, it's a quadratic equation because x is squared, and these are parabolas. First thing I look at is the x squared term, okay, and it tells me that it's negative. So the negative tells me that it opens downward, so I'm going to cross out A, and I'm going to cross out C. And then I know it's either B or D. So to find if it's B or D, I'm going to take x equals 0 and plug it in my equation and see what it is. So I got y equals negative 0, which we don't really need a negative, 0 squared plus 2, and you probably already see where this is going. So you get negative 0 squared is 0, 0, negative 0, I mean, that's just 0, right? And so we get y equals 2. Okay, and that's a positive 2, right? So I look down here, when x is 0, which is right there, y equals a positive 2, which is right there, which is right there. So that tells me these answers. If you look here, When x is 0, it's a negative, looks like a 3 or 4 down there. So that's not the answer. And so my answer in this case would be B. Okay? Let me do one more quickly here so you kind of get the hang of these, and then you can try some on your own. Okay, so again, this one looks a little bit different because it's got this negative 4x, but don't worry about that. All we want to look at is the x squared term, right? Again, we know this quadratic because they're parabolas. And so I look at the x squared and it's positive, right? So I can eliminate a because it's opening downward, and I can eliminate b because it's opening downward. And so it's either C or it's B. And so again, I'm going to take my x value and plug in 0. So I'm going to have y equals 0, oops, if I can do this, 0 squared minus 4 times 0. Hopefully my handwriting gets better as I do more of these. Plus 4. Okay, and so let's see what happens here. And this is why you always try, if you ever are asked to pick a number to plug in, you always want to pick 0 if you can't, to make things sense. So we're going to have y equals on this side. And on the right side, I have 0 squared, which is 0. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. And what I'm left with is a positive 4. So when x is 0, so let's start with b down here. We get x is 0, y should be 4. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4. And that looks about right. Let's check c just to be safe. We got x is 0, 1, 2. Okay, and that's not correct. So it can't be C also. So the answer is B, which is good. So hopefully you can get these, and good luck with the questions on your assessment.